As long as he could remember, his childhood had been filled with stories, the lives of his ancestors, the history of his BLD. He always enjoyed those tales, feeling connected to his family during those formative years. However, as he grew older, he came to understand a painful truth: his family had forsaken him. Isuku Yagi had suffered through another dreamless night, a common occurrence for him. As he glanced out the window, the refreshing early morning breeze swept through his room. The cold had never truly bothered him, and he doubted it would as he continued to grow. With a soft groan, he sat up, only to be jolted by pain. His ribs ached, his back burned, and the patches of purple skin on his face throbbed. A small amount of BLD streaked his swollen cheek, a familiar sensation that he had come to recognize all too well. He touched his cheek with his left hand, watching as the skin turned blue under his touch, the still wet BLD beginning to crystallize. Despite being labeled quirkless, he was not powerless. He had inherited the ability to control ice, a gift passed down from his ancestors who were cryokinetic. Unfortunately, without a quirk, his ability remained unrefined and dangerous, even after 3 years of practice. He pondered the idea of revealing his powers to his family. Would it change anything? Would it erase the years of mistreatment or heal the injuries inflicted upon him? Perhaps it could lead to support, but he doubted it would stem from genuine affection. Instead, it would likely come from guilt or pity, which he would find unbearable. As he focused on healing his wounds, ice spread from his hand across his body. If anyone had touched him, they would have felt his temperature drop significantly. After 5 minutes, he managed to alleviate some of the pain, but his left hand felt numb and burned from the cold. Frustration and resentment swirled within him as he struck the ice encasing his hand, determined to free himself. With a crack, the ice shattered, and he took a moment to regain feeling in his fingers. He squeezed and moved them, relieved they weren't permanently locked. Time was short, so he quickly dressed in the mismatched clothing he had scavenged, feeling a sense of inadequacy wash over him. He finished off his outfit with a worn school backpack before leaving his room. As he stepped into the hallway, he noticed the silence in the house. They were still asleep, and while he felt a small sense of relief, he knew they would wake soon. He hurried down the wooden stairs, not stopping until he reached the beautifully furnished kitchen. The dark hardwood and pristine decor held no ill will for him. His feelings were reserved for those who inhabited the space, not the space itself. Stepping further onto the tiled kitchen floor, Izuku's eyes scanned the counters. Like anyone else, he needed food, and he had long given up on the idea that his family would provide more than the bare minimum if he stayed until breakfast. His sister, Izumi Yagi, often complained, leading to the fresh fruit that usually sat on the counter being hidden away. The added cabinet locks kept him from accessing anything in the cupboards. Fortunately, at night, this habit of lockdown became more relaxed. He moved to where the fridge stood, placing his hands into the small gap between the fridge and the wall. Pushing forward, he found the food he had stashed the previous night, a sandwich bag filled with oats and a water bottle. Though crude and unfulfilling, it was still a meal. After tearing the tape away, Izuku stuffed the items into his backpack, taking care to push the fridge back into place. Leaving traces of his crime against his own family was never a good idea. While he didn't mind drawing their anger, he preferred to avoid a fight he had no chance of winning. The frustration of having to back down only fueled his anger further. He left for the door, knowing he had nearly an hour, perhaps an hour and a half, before he would face the daily beatings he was growing tired of. Exiting the large 2-story house that resembled a mansion, he walked down the long driveway and out the main gate. As he walked, he tried to ignore the gazes that followed him: pity, curiosity, concern. His clothes, his body, and his wounds always drew this type of attention. Though he had learned not to linger on their stares, his grip on the straps of his backpack tightened. He hated being viewed as weak or lesser, even if their concern came from a good place. Taking a deep breath, he exhaled into the chilly air, watching as his breath misted in the cold. His steps quickened. The faster he escaped the stairs, the sooner he could train. The path led him to a playground, empty at this early hour. He took a seat on the swing set and quickly dug into his bag. Eating a handful of oats, he used the water sparingly to help swallow the dry food. There was no flavor, and the texture was unpleasant, but he finished the small sandwich bag before folding it and placing it back in his backpack. Opportunities for fresh food were rare. With his stomach settled, Izuku rolled up the sleeves of his sweater, revealing numerous scars. None were self-inflicted, but no one would believe that. His skin bore severe burns and deep cuts, remnants of the creative ways his sister and her friends had hurt him. He focused on the palms of his hands, preparing for the training he had been doing for years. Taking a deep breath, he tried to clear his mind, recalling how his mother, sister, and ancestors had trained. Listening to their practices through the walls of his room had been a great help. However, despite knowing the steps, he always faced a single problem. No matter how hard he tried to clear his mind, it only became more clouded. The stares of pity from bystanders, their looks of superiority, his mother's indifferent face, his father's annoyed remarks, his sister's scorn, how he scavenged to live, and his own feelings of inferiority rushed into his thoughts. Eyes closed, Izuku felt his hands grow colder, the moisture in his breath crystallizing in the air. His hands began to lose feeling as he focused on his training. When he opened his eyes, he stared at his palms. The ice that had formed was nothing like the stories he had heard. The edges were jagged and inconsistent, lacking the clear blue color he had imagined. As he closed his fingers, his wrists shook, not just from the cold but from the pressure of his failure. The ice creaked and cracked, and then, with a sudden crunch, it broke apart, spilling onto the frozen grass. Below. He sat there, waiting for the ice that had begun to form on his face, feet, and arms to melt away. This couldn't be the end of what he could achieve, could it? Shaking his head, Izuku stopped the thought before it fully formed. He knew he had to continue improving, yet he couldn't help but compare himself to the heroes from the stories he admired. How was it that he felt so far from their accomplishments and capabilities? The question lingered as he extended his arms once again. It was a mistake to forget, a mistake he promised never to repeat. It was the last day of middle school, just a few months before the start of the preparatory hero academy, all leading up to his ultimate goal of attending a hero college. The classroom buzzed with excitement, students chatting happily among friends. Their quirks varied widely in power and appearance, and many expressed their enthusiasm for joining a high-tier prep academy before finally attending UA. However, even he, being quirkless, could see that only 5 students in the class had the potential to meet UA's rigorous requirements. These 5 had powerful quirks and important connections to UA. Despite being quirkless, Izuku knew that some of the quirks his classmates boasted about were not as impressive as they claimed. Yet, their sneering looks when they glanced his way stung. He tried to ignore their conversations, his mind focused on his own perceived failures. Conjuring ice was never an issue, but controlling it was a different story. No matter how many times he tried, the results were always the same. The small puncture wounds on his hands served as a painful reminder. He was somewhat relieved that the BLD had frozen, preventing any visible signs of his struggles. "All right, class, settle down," a voice called out, cutting through the chatter. The excited conversations quieted as a nearly 40-year-old teacher took the podium, a stack of papers in hand. His serious expression commanded attention. "As you know, this is your last day. That doesn't mean you're off the hook. It's time to complete your career aptitude test." "What? On the last day?" The students groaned in disappointment, but their discontent was short-lived. The teacher threw the papers into the air, a large smile breaking across his face. "Ah, who am I kidding? You all want to be heroes, right?" The students cheered, their quirks activating as they shouted their agreement. All of them aspired to be heroes, including Izuku, at least until he learned who would be joining them. The cheers were abruptly interrupted by a loud explosion that echoed through the classroom. 2 students climbed onto their desks, both with spiky, ash-blonde hair and red eyes. Large smirks adorned their faces as one of the twins spoke up. Hey teach. Don't lump us in with those extras. Yeah. These guys wouldn't even make it as sidekicks at some D-list hero agency, the boy's sister shouted in support, their hands crackling with energy as they glared at the teacher, their fierce gazes sweeping over the class, prompting many to protest. Hey. The teacher glanced at the file on the podium, flipping through a few pages before looking up at the 5 students. He recognized Katsuki and Katsumi Bakugo, the loud ash-blonde twins. Then there were Shoto and Shoka Todoroki, the son and daughter of the number 2 hero, Endeavor. They shared dual-colored hair, white and red, and their eyes were different colors, one blue and one gray. If they had been the same gender, the only way to tell them apart would have been their hair and eye colors. Finally, there was Izumi Yagi, the only member of the Yagi siblings with the potential to be a great hero. She was the daughter of the number 6 hero, Inko Yagi, known as Frost, and the number 1 hero, Toshinori Yagi, better known as All Might. Contrary to what his family believed, Izuku had overheard every secret shared within the thin walls of his room. Izumi had long, silky greenish blonde hair and striking green eyes that contrasted with his almost teal ones. Unlike Izuku, she had been well-fed and trained, boasting an athletic figure and a beauty that caught the attention of many boys in middle school. Even if she were not his sister, he would have found her unappealing. Ignoring the tightening of his jaw, Izuku let out a small sigh. They were individuals that no one in Aldera or the world could forget. That's right, you 5 all applied to the U. A preparatory school. Incredible, all 5 of you nearly scored perfectly on the mock tests. A murmur of amazement rippled through the room, and the students who had complained about Katsuki's and Katsumi's remarks fell silent, shrinking back in their seats. The dream was to enter UA, and realistically, as long as it was a good prep academy, one could get in. However, the only academy with a direct line into U was the one run by the same college, specifically designed to identify the top heroes. Applying required a significant amount of money, and to be accepted, one needed excellent control over their quirk. The class could only accept this, especially since these 5 students were always the top-ranked, particularly Izumi Yagi. She was powerful but undisciplined, disregarding the stories of their family, while Izuku had clung to every word. The honor in their BLD, the responsibilities they had been given, all seemed abandoned. Something Izuku couldn't bear. She was spoiled and coddled, never achieving anything on her own. While receiving help isn't inherently bad, his parents had only ever indulged her, leaving him to fend for himself. It was hard to consider her his sister. The bond they once shared had been severed, destroyed by her own actions. Ah, Izuku Yagi, it seems you were going to apply to the U. A preparatory school too. Izuku's growing resentment paused. The teacher's words echoed in the now quiet room. Although he had promised never to forget, he felt he had failed once again. The future career plan he submitted at the beginning of 6th grade came flooding back to him. He had never changed it. It was a sentence full of amusement. The faculty at Aldera were quite open about their disdain for the quirkless, and Izuku had learned that quickly. Assignments he completed were marked as missing, and tests received zeros no matter how correct his answers were. By the 2nd semester of his first year, he had stopped bringing school supplies altogether. Now, his grades were classified as abysmal, and this was just another jab thrown his way. Deku. You think you can apply for UA? I'll take you down. Katsuki shouted, his hands already preparing for an explosion. You, a quirkless loser, want to go to UA? They would never accept someone like you. Before the confrontation escalated, the teacher intervened. Bakugo, I still need to finish class. Please restrain yourself until the bell. The school, despite their feelings, had to maintain a certain reputation. Until the bell. If it didn't happen during class time, it wasn't their problem. Katsuki reluctantly returned to his seat, his glare fixed on Izuku, a smirk forming on his lips. Izuku wished he could be surprised, but he never was anymore. An hour later, the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. As the classroom emptied, Izuku waited. He felt a hand on his shoulder, the heat radiating through his uniform. "Come on, Deku. You know what happens now, don't you?" Katsuki whispered in his ear. Izuku glanced at the group, noticing one person in the back, her gaze cast downward. He didn't protest, he simply picked up his backpack and followed them out of the classroom. They walked to a grassy area at the back of the school, still damp from the morning dew. Izuku had been thinking about one thing for so long, he was tired of this. Tired of the stares, tired of the malice directed at him, tired of his inaction. As he stared at the backs of the group, he clenched his fists and slowly removed his backpack. Ice began to form on the soles of his shoes, freezing the grass beneath him. Katsuki spoke again, "You think you can be a hero, Deku?" The laughter of Shoto Todoroki, who stood nearby, echoed in the air. "Izumi, are you sure this guy is your brother?" Shoto asked, amusement in his tone. At the mention of their connection, Izumi shuddered. "Don't call him that," she exclaimed, as if the idea was repugnant. "Maybe he should just jump off the roof." Katsuki laughed, joined by the others. "Come on, Shoka. Say something to him." Shoka, hesitant, stammered, I don't." They spoke as if Izuku wasn't there. He might be too scared to do it himself. "Maybe we sh." Katsuki's taunt was cut off as Izuku tightened the strap of his backpack around his neck. The sudden action caught the group's attention. "Deku! Let him go!" Shoto yelled, rushing toward him. In a desperate move, Izuku pushed Katsuki into Shoto, tackling them both to the ground. Katsuki struggled to regain his breath while Shoto was taken by surprise. Izuku's fists began to strike, hitting their faces with force. The shock would eventually wear off, but for now, he continued to fight back. The girls watched in disbelief as Katsuki and Shoto tried to defend themselves. For the first time, Shoto felt a chill as Izuku's fists made contact. It was the sight of blood on her brother's face that finally prompted Katsumi to act. She rushed forward, placing her hands on Izuku's stomach. "Stop it, Deku." Her explosion pushed him off the brothers, giving them space to breathe. Even injured, Izuku stood shakily, glaring at the group. The part of his uniform that had burned away was now coated with ice. He watched as Katsumi rushed to Shoto, worry evident on her face, while Izumi did the same for Katsuki. The only one left standing was Shoya, visibly shaken. Clenching his right hand, Izuku ran forward, intent on retaliating against the treatment he had always received. He knew he might not win this fight, but he was determined to stand his ground. When a jagged piece of ice struck his face, he wasn't surprised. Falling to the ground, he pressed his hand against his face, feeling blood seep through his fingers. With one eye closed, he could only watch the blood drip and freeze on the ground. In his ears, he heard Izumi's voice pleading for him to stop, and he saw her, hands raised, blocks of ice hovering above her, fear evident in her eyes. Even though it had been a surprise attack, the fact that he had managed to hurt Shoto and Katsuki was shocking. The quirkless boy he was should never have been able to stand up to them, especially after all the times they had overpowered him. The pain caused a cry to escape Izuku's lips, and he felt as though he could pass out from it. But they had never been merciful. Just as he lowered his head, a leg struck his side. "Who do you think you are?" Katsuki shouted, his anger boiling over at being beaten by someone he considered worthless. He continued to pay back what Izuku had done, relentlessly pushing him down. His foot pressed against Izuku's head, forcing it into the floor. Kicks aimed at his injuries only made them worse. His attacks escalated until he was unexpectedly stopped by Shoka. The words exchanged were inaudible to Izuku, who could only focus on numbing the pain from the gash over his eye. Lying there, Izuku clenched and unclenched his jaw, trying to cope with the searing pain. He could hear the hurried footsteps of Izumi and Shoya, who were preparing to leave. Just then, he noticed a small ball of ice appear on the ground in front of him, a gesture he interpreted as pity. With his blood-soaked fingers, he grasped the ball, feeling the cold seep into his skin. As he squeezed, the ice began to crack. Once the group was out of earshot, he crushed the ice completely, sending shards flying in all directions. A chilling breath escaped his lips as he shivered, his right eye closed while his left burned with rage. The walk home felt endless, the sun setting by the time he could move again. The power he had displayed had taken its toll, leaving him frozen and in pain. With only his uniform to cover his injuries, he tore off a sleeve to use as a bandage. He knew he would need to find supplies that night to properly tend to his wounds. As he approached the front gates of his home, he could see the bright lights of the lower floor through the black iron gate. They were home, all of them. He paused at the door, hand hovering over the doorknob. Instead of opening it, he stepped back and peered through a slightly parted window. Inside, Katsuki, Katsumi, and Shoto lay on the couch, their injuries carefully bandaged. Shoya sat in the kitchen, looking timid. And there were his parents, Toshinori Yagi, a tall blonde man, and Inko Yagi, a slim green-haired woman. Behind them, Izumi hid, waiting for him to walk through the door. He understood their expectations. Despite living under the same roof, Izuku only interacted with Toshinori when he was punished for Izumi's actions. He couldn't hear their conversation but recognized the hostility in their muted voices. As he touched his right eye, he realized that even if he showed them his pain, they wouldn't care. They were not his true family, they were tainted by shame. Inko and Izumi had forsaken the meaning of their blood. He refused to follow in their footsteps. There was only one option left. Stepping back from the window, Izuku moved around the house to the side. He would wait until night fell and the temperature dropped. He would not give Izumi the confrontation she desired or the apology she expected. He rejected all of it. When the moon was high, he moved. He knew the front door was locked, but the kitchen window was always left unlocked. Slipping inside, he made his way toward his parents' bedroom. The door was unlocked, and as he stepped inside, he saw Toshinori and Inko fast asleep, covered in thick blankets. Ignoring them, he focused on one thing. He searched Inko's closet, relying on his memories to guide him. After several minutes, he found the box his mother had once held dear, buried beneath a pile of clothes. Anger surged through him at the disrespect it had received. He quickly grabbed the box, noting its light weight and the symbol that marked its significance. This was what he had been seeking, the symbol of his bloodline. Carefully placing the box in his backpack, he left the room, closing the door behind him. His next task was to gather supplies, knowing he would never return. The night air was cold, the wind biting at his skin. His only warmth came from the thick jacket over his shoulders and a cigarette between his fingers. He took a slow drag, enjoying the heat in his lungs despite knowing it was unhealthy. He sighed, wishing for a different reality, one where his quirk was strong enough to be a hero, where he lived in comfort and never felt alone. But that was just a dream. As he twisted the cap off his thermos, preparing to take a sip, he felt the temperature drop too late. A hand gripped the back of his neck, and he gasped, choking as the cold spread through him. His eyes widened in panic as he caught a glimpse of his reflection, the last thing he saw being a pair of emerald eyes. It was hard to sleep, not for a lack of effort, but because of the harsh conditions surrounding him. Snow cascaded off the side of his makeshift bed while the wind howled ominously. Despite his natural resistance to the cold, he still shivered. The layers of clothes and blankets he had piled on did little to improve his situation. He traced the scar over his eye with a gloved hand, finding some comfort in the reminder of his purpose. Sitting up slowly, he ensured the cables he had secured remained tight, knowing that one small mistake could lead to disaster, jeopardizing everything he had worked tirelessly for. With trembling arms, he reached for a familiar box. Resting his left hand atop its symbol, he opened the small chest and sifted through its contents. Pushing aside a stack of yuan bills he had earned, he grasped a nearly worn-down pencil. Carefully, he made another mark on the calendar he had purchased, a small indulgence that had cost him some of his food money. December 13th now bore his fourth tally mark. Nearly 2 years had passed. He closed his eyes briefly, knowing he should rest longer, but the urgency of his dwindling food supply pushed him to prepare for the next leg of his journey. He packed his belongings, securing metal spikes to the bottom of his boots and ensuring the rope was fastened to his HRNSS. With practiced efficiency, he dismantled his hanging tent, strapped on his supply pack, affixed a mask to his face, and readied his ice pick. His gear had been acquired through various means, often scavenged or stolen, as his earnings from the streets barely covered his basic needs. Hugging the wall, he drove the jagged edge of his ice pick into the icy surface, ignoring the snow that fell around him. He began his climb once more, his goal unchanged from the past few years. At higher altitudes, breathing became increasingly difficult. The thin air strained his lungs, and each ascent grew more challenging. The mist escaping his mouth was a clear sign that his body temperature was dropping. He realized early on that no amount of training could fully prepare him for this harsh environment. Suddenly, a gust of wind pushed past him, heavy and swift. Had he not anchored himself, he would have been swept away. One experience of being thrown against the cliffside had been enough. He wanted to avoid another terrifying fall. Bracing himself, he focused on his condition. His muscles ached, and he felt the bruises on his skin throb. Another reason sleep eluded him was the memory of being slammed against the wall throughout the night. His cracked lips begged for moisture, but he knew better than to oblige. Wetting them would only lead to more pain as the saliva froze. When the wind calmed, he looked upward. Though he still couldn't see the peak, he sensed he was getting closer. Freezing to death might have been considered a mercy, as there was no pain, only a gradual fatigue as his body began to shut down. A sudden scream shattered the silence. One of the men nearby had suffered a severe injury, his arm frozen and then shattered with a single blow. The pain he experienced was prolonged, a testament to the cruel nature of their situation. Soon, his companions would meet similar fates, each method of execution more painful than the last. Hours passed, and with each moment, the sun dipped lower. The cold intensified, and he doubted he could eat any of the food he had brought without risking his teeth. His grip on the mountain and his ice pick began to weaken, fatigue creeping in. His eyes threatened to close, and he felt his strength waning. Making mistakes was becoming all too common. His right foot slipped, nearly causing him to fall. He couldn't rely on his HRNSS, especially with the steep drop below. Adjusting his footing, he pressed on, knowing he had to ascend as high as possible before darkness fell completely. His breathing had become labored, as if he were struggling to stay afloat. His clothes were wet and freezing during his ascent. The mask covering his face went through a cycle of melting and freezing. His body temperature had dropped to the point where he began to lose feeling in his fingertips. His vision grew hazy, and the thickness of the fog and cold air made it nearly impossible to see. Still, he climbed further, his icepick inching its way up until he heard a sound. Click. He pulled downward, the icepick hadn't made contact with the cliff but instead scraped against an edge. Quickly, his fatigue forgotten, adrenaline surged through him, pushing him upward with renewed vigor. The pain he felt vanished as he grabbed the edge and began to pull himself up. Climbing over the edge, he was met with solid ground and finally lay flat on his stomach. A shaky breath escaped his mouth. He had made the climb, but his journey was far from over. Using his left hand, he dug into his pockets, discarding long-dead hand warmers and finding a folded paper. Shielding the writing with his body, he slowly unfolded it. His vision was overtaken by words that matched the writings of his ancestors. To say they were directions would be generous, rather, they were fragments, some taken from stories his ancestors wrote, others parts of poems. In every sense, it was a complex riddle. It had taken him a year to even begin to understand what he was reading and even longer before he attempted to follow them. Tucking the paper away, he adjusted his pack, trying to find a comfortable position for it on his blistered shoulders. He then began to walk. Even when the sun fully set, he continued to trudge forward. Now that he had momentum, he wouldn't stop until he reached his destination. The night enveloped him in darkness, making it a blessing to see even an inch past his nose. His only source of light was a small, nearly unreliable flashlight, its beam flickering as it jostled with his movements. He could not keep track of time, he couldn't stop to mark another day. He could only walk forward, glancing at the paper he took out periodically. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. His eyes grew bloodshot as he forced them open. His legs cracked the ice that formed on them, breaking it apart. He only stopped when he reached it. Despite the low visibility, he could see its silhouette a building. Finally, his walk picked up speed, he jogged before running. He grew closer and closer, unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him. His feet squished against the snow, and his eyes caught a glimpse of a decrepit statue before he came across stairs decorated with dragons at the base. He continued his approach and began to climb. Had it been daytime, he would have seen the frozen figures that stood guard, a final show of loyalty to their grand MSTR. Once he reached the top, he wasted no time pressing his hands against the large Chinese-style doors. The wood creaked as he pushed, and after some effort, he eventually found his way inside. The halls were darkened. He knew it wasn't meant to be, but he wished he had heard something upon opening the doors. However, all he got was silence within the darkened halls. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust, and when they did it was abandoned. He could see it almost as clearly as day. It was as though the building had been frozen in time. The walls, roof, and floors all carried an eerie state of preservation, undisturbed until he arrived. He roamed, hearing only his boots click across the stone floor. The hope for someone to be there faded quickly. The only company he had were the numerous figures that remained in silent meditation, their heads bowed as he walked through the hallways, stopping only when he reached what seemed to be a throne room. Just like all the other rooms, his eyes landed on a symbol. This was what remained of his ancestral ground, where his family originated, where his BLD had formed. Perhaps he wanted to bask in the radiance of his ancestors, or maybe it was the cold that drove him to light a small torch with his last remaining matchstick. No, it was to see where his tears began to fall. He had come here hoping for something, anything. But all he found was nothing. For the first time in years, he sobbed in frustration. He had refused to let tears spill in the last few years, but now no one could see him crumble. Falling to the ground, his pack slipped from his shoulders, and the torch he held rolled across the ground, continuing to do so against the backdrop of his cries until he heard it collide. Although he thought it wasn't worth the effort to pay attention, in that split second, he finally saw it. His cries quickly stopped, and his feet found the ground beneath him. He ran forward, scooping the torch from the ground and allowing the flame to illuminate the object in front of him. Encased in ice, preserved in its entirety, was a body, and in its hands was a box, more decorated and much larger than the one he carried with him. It was unclear what he was meant to do. Placing the torch against the ice did nothing, the flame didn't manage to melt even a single droplet of water. Maybe it was fate or intuition, but he pulled the glove off his right hand with his mouth. The cold blisters on his flesh burst, and with a shaky hand, he placed his hand onto the ice. It was cold, colder than anything he had ever felt before, but slowly it began to melt away. The distance between his hand and the body of his ancestor shrank with each passing second until finally, his hand rested on the box. He was scared to move, he wanted to stop and thank the body of his ancestor, but instead, he opened the box. Afraid of desecrating the contents inside, he quickly switched hands, his right now carrying the torch as his left grabbed what looked to be a small book. With slow and methodical movements, he opened it and found himself stunned. On the paper were words much more complex and fragmented than those he had already seen, however, through each passage, he could read a name, or perhaps more accurately, a title. Subzero. The voice was calm and collected, but beneath it lay a hint of fear. A skinny, pale-skinned man sat behind a large oak desk, his dark brown eyes fixed on the association's so-called hero. This title felt misleading. Like other members of the association, he was more of an assassin for hire. Their relationship was new, but the masked man before him was effective, making any attempt at small talk seem pointless. Thank you for your assistance once again. The board member intended for this transaction to be brief. He slid a small briefcase across the desk toward Subzero. The payment as promised. We'll contact you. His words were cut off by the rough voice of the masked man. Our business is done. I want what is owed. The statement was unambiguous, leaving no room for debate. The board member understood that Subzero had another objective. He was a valuable ally. Nodding, the man replied, I've already sent word. Grabbing the handle of the briefcase, Subzero turned his back on the Hero Association, not allowing the man a moment to say more. He had earned enough to revive his clan through his actions. Now, he needed prestige, and in this era, only one job could provide that. Under the last Grandmaster, the Lin Kuei had evolved beyond an assassination clan, and under his rule, it would do so again. He would not compromise. He was Lin Kuei. Izumi. Wake up, it's time. Awoken by the shouting, Isuku Yagi jumped out of bed, her long blonde hair tousled and a streak of drool on her chin. Wiping her mouth with the sleeve of her pajamas, the now 18-year-old Izumi called out, shielding her eyes from the sunlight streaming through her window. I'm up, Mom. Sitting up, she ignored her messy hair as she shifted her body, leaving the warmth of her bed. She quickly made her way to her large walk-in closet, undressing with purpose. The years had been kind to her, and through her training and the influence of One for All, she had developed a physique that many would envy. She changed into a tank top, a training jumpsuit, and athletic shoes, tying her green blonde hair into a tight ponytail. Staring into her reflection, Izumi's emerald green eyes focused on her face before she slapped her cheeks to pump herself up. Feeling her adrenaline rise, she took deep breaths. Today was U.A.'s entrance exam. Her parents had spent years preparing her for this moment, as she had refused to be a special admission. Despite their support, nerves crept in. You can do this. Her father was the #1 hero, and she had inherited his quirk. She was determined to ace this exam, become the new #1 hero, and be the best she could be. After her internal pep talk, she quickly left her room and entered the hallway. Her shoes thudded against the wooden floor with each step, but her stride faltered when she saw a lone door. Her smile faded into a scowl. Tisk, it had been years since that person had gone missing, and her mother had become depressed. Resentment bubbled in Izumi's chest, and her hands clenched into tight fists. How could he do that to her mother? Shaking her head, she looked away and continued down the hallway, descending the stairs to the ground floor. As usual, the pleasant scent of breakfast filled the air. Upon reaching the bottom, she was immediately enveloped in a large hug. Her father, Toshinori Yagi in his all-might form, held her tightly, his toothy smile brightening the room. Dad! Why are you in your muscle form? She asked, muffled against his chest as he released her. With a puff of smoke, Toshinori transformed into his frail-looking self. I can't let my daughter see this depressing sight first thing in the morning. Haha, he laughed, his genuine affection evident. Izumi smiled back. It wasn't long after her brother disappeared that her father sustained his injury, just a few months later, when he encountered the same villain responsible for the death of the 7th user of One for All. Since then, Izumi's resolve had only strengthened. Suddenly, a small ball of ice telekinetically collided with the side of Toshinori's head. Stop distracting Izumi, honey. She has to eat before the exam. Inko Yagi stood in the kitchen, a plastic spatula in one hand and her other hand on her hip, glaring at her husband before her expression softened as she turned to Izumi. Sweetie, hurry and sit, you need your energy. You didn't have to throw that ice, Toshinori mumbled to himself. Izumi took a seat at the dinner table, watching Inko return to the stove, preparing a hearty breakfast. Her gaze drifted to the counter, where a picture sat beside the stovetop. It featured Inko, Toshinori, herself, and he was there too. Smiling brightly, they were hugging each other tightly. Izumi remembered that day. They were 4 and 5 years old, just a month before their quirk test. Inko had fallen into tears when she realized that past the age of 4, pictures of Izuku smiling were rare. Therefore, she had no choice but to cherish this happy memory. Resting her head on her hand, Izumi looked away, only glancing back when Inko placed a glass, a plate, and a bowl in front of her. Her breakfast was always carefully prepared: eggs, bacon, hash browns, a bowl of assorted fruit, and a glass of orange juice. Her parents prioritized her nutrition, and she appreciated it. Now then, hurry and eat. Both her parents took their seats, and after giving thanks, they began to eat. The day was just beginning. The silence of the apartment dining room was only broken by the presence of Subzero. He sat with his knees touching the floor, the weight of his body resting on his heels while his back remained straight. The waist-high table held only 2 items, a small teacup with steam wafting through the cold air and a bowl of rice porridge, a humble meal. With his eyes closed and face unmasked, Izuku reached for his tea and took a small sip, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm, undisturbed in his meditation. His clothing, like his food, was simple black sweatpants, a plain gray sweater, and black athletic shoes. Normally, he would have dressed as a representative of his clan, but today was different. Still, the Lin Kuei would not go unnoticed. Affixed to the left side of his chest was a medallion engraved with a dragon, a relic of his ancestors that he now held. Opening his eyes, Izuku's gaze drifted to the digital clock in the small kitchen, which read 6 a.m. The entrance exam for you started at 9 a.m., giving him plenty of time to prepare. He closed his eyes once more, knowing he would soon leave. Izumi. Izumi's smile brightened at the sound of her name. She spread her arms and ran forward across the sidewalk, embracing another girl her age. Katsumi. After pulling away from the hug, Izumi flinched as Katsumi playfully punched her. The girl was as spirited as ever. To play along, Izumi infused a small amount of her power into her fist and returned the playful jab. "Hey!" Katsumi exclaimed, quickly giving up. Just then, Katsuki strode up behind his sister and playfully smacked her on the back of the head. "Dumbass," he muttered, only to receive a light kick in return. Before their playful bickering escalated, Izumi interrupted by hugging Katsuki, causing a blush to spread across his face as he looked away. "Sup," he stammered. Katsumi laughed at her brother's embarrassment. Katsuki, not taking kindly to the interruption, stepped out of Izumi's hug and butted heads with his sister, both of them exchanging playful insults. Ignoring the pair, Izumi turned to the Todoroki twins beside them. "Shoya," she said, taking the female Todoroki's hands in hers and sharing a small smile. Shoto, her brother, nodded in acknowledgement. "Come on, let's get going." If they delayed any longer, they would be late for the exam. The Bakugo twins stopped their playful fighting and followed suit. The walk to you was peaceful, the group chatting casually about nothing in particular. Upon reaching the entrance, none were surprised. The Todoroki siblings and Izumi were accustomed to the campus due to their parents. The Bakugo twins, however, pretended to be unfazed, not wanting to appear overly impressed. As they reached the top of the stairs, they headed toward the exam orientation, only stopping when Izumi caught a girl who was about to fall. As she helped the girl to her feet, Izumi froze, sensing a chill in the air that sent shivers down everyone's spine. Even she and the Todoroki twins could feel it. Turning her head, she saw a boy walking through the entrance of UA, his hand covering his face. The temperature dropped further as a half-mask made of ice appeared below his hand. The mask's sharp, angular features were a sight to behold, something that even skilled ice sculptors would struggle to replicate. The light blue ice shimmered in the sunlight, and mist wafted around it. Everyone's eyes instinctively avoided meeting his cold blue gaze, feeling the weight of his presence as he walked, leaving rapidly melting imprints with each step. He never forgot their faces, but he doubted they remembered his. His eyes scanned the crowd of students, noting the unknown quirks and the vague capabilities of those with mutant abilities. The lack of information was unsettling. His work with the association had given him enough intelligence to speculate, but here, he faced many unknowns. Silencing his thoughts, he continued forward, signing in under his ancestor Kuai Liang. His name was not what mattered, Subzero was the title that brought honor, not his own. Entering the written test site, he took his designated seat and waited. Meanwhile, Nizu, the principal of U, sat at a large control board, a single vanilla folder in hand. The information inside was minimal, a source of concern for the past few days. This was different from the usual admissions, a hero in training referred to you by the Hero Association was unprecedented. Opening the file, he reviewed the contents. Hero Association Collaborator, real name, Isuku redacted alias, Subzero affiliation, Lin Kuei place of residence, unknown relationship status, single SEC, male height, 6 feet, 5 inches weight, unknown quirk, none reported negatively tested. Registered as quirkless. Abilities, assassination, extreme close combat prowess, cryomancy. Relatives, Toshinori redacted, father, Inko redacted, mother, Izumi redacted, sister. Profile, Grandmaster of the Lin Kuei, an ancient clan from China. Further information is unknown. Recognized as an unaffiliated and established clan. Self-proclaimed inheritor of the titles of Grandmaster and Subzero. No known criminal history. Origin of cryomancy abilities unknown. Does not match any known quirk mutations. Caution, disregard of clan affiliation, direct confrontation, or ridicule may lead to hostility. Attack or disposal not possible. Recommendation, honor and respect are highly valued. Use of the title Grandmaster or Subzero is recommended. Meet ASAP to establish friendly cooperation. Nizu leaned back in his seat, letting out an uncharacteristic groan. Principal Nizu. A new voice made the chimera snap the folder closed. He turned to see Aizawa, a tired-looking teacher. Should we start the written exam? Yes, proceed. The auditorium darkened as students flooded in, taking their seats. The chatter gradually quieted, and Izuku found himself surrounded by other hopeful candidates. Their eyes briefly lingered on his face before they focused on the stage. Cementos and Midnight initiated the written portion of U.A.'s entrance exam. Each segment of the test was distinct, leaving no room for cheating. Izuku remained calm as he picked up the pencil provided and began his exam. Despite his years away from formal education, he had never neglected his studies. The test covered various subjects, English, grammar, biology, history, and math. It was extensive, explaining the low acceptance rate. After 2 hours, the written test concluded. The auditorium lights dimmed further, and a spotlight illuminated the stage as Present Mike appeared, with a large projection screen behind him displaying 4 distinct robots. "All right listeners, can I get a YHH?" he called out, met with silence. Present Mike's sweat dropped. Tough crowd. Anyways, now that you have finished the written exam, it's time for the practical. As you saw on the pamphlets, there are 4 robots. One is worth 1 point, the next 2 and 3, each stronger than the last. No, before he could finish, a tall blue-haired boy raised his hand. Present Mike acknowledged him. Yes, examinee 6782, what is your question? Standing up, the boy asked, yes, Present Mike, you only mentioned 3 robots. However, the pamphlet clearly states there are 4. If this is an error, it reflects poorly on a prestigious school like you, and you. He pointed at Izuku. Throughout this exam, you've had your face masked. May I remind you that unprohibited quirk usage is against the rules set by you, Your quirk has affected the students around you, no doubt distracting them. One might have expected Izuku to lash out, but he remained silent, arms crossed, staring the blue-haired boy in the eyes. The mist from his mask lingered in the air. The other boy shrank back, averting his gaze, only to jump as Izuku's finger tapped against his arm. Quietly, the boy sat back down. Well then, ahem, moving on. For your question, examinee 3459, IT is not a mistake. I just hadn't mentioned the fourth one, the 0 pointer, which is worth nothing and is more of an obstacle, so it's best to steer clear. Present Mick's response elicited a quiet, thank you, and he continued, now we will hand out your cards, which will direct you to the mock city where your exam will take place. As Present Mike announced this, students received papers indicating their test site. Izuku read his card, which said, Test Site A. He stood and left the auditorium with the others. Boarding the designated bus, he took a seat at the back, silently evaluating his peers. None appeared extraordinary, but he would not underestimate any of them. The bus ride was brief, stopping near a large stadium 30 minutes later. Exiting the bus, he joined the other students near a large metal gate, waiting for the announcement. He noticed a nervous brunette among the crowd when the blue-haired boy approached him again. It was clear that manners were ingrained in him. Bowing at a perfect angle, the boy said, I must apologize for singling you out during the announcement. It was not my intention to offend you. Was he apologizing out of fear? More than likely. I accept your apology, Izuku replied, his deep voice resonating with weight. Standing straight, the boy extended his hand. My name is Tenya Ida. Ida found his hand grasped by another, the coldness of Izuku's grip surprising him. Subzero. Ida wanted to question the name, but instinct told him to refrain. Nodding, they broke their handshake. Well then, I wish you good, alright, little listeners, get ready as the exam is about to start. Cutting Ida off, Present Mick's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. At his announcement, Izuku lost all formality, moving through the crowd toward the door. In 3:21 go. The metal door creaked open. Izuku wasted no time, squeezing through the gap as it unveiled itself. With his right hand outstretched, he took a breath, and ice shot out, freezing the concrete beneath him as he slid forward. Entering the city, he spotted several robots, each varying in point value, 2 3-pointers, 4 1-pointers, and 1 2-pointer. Stopping his slide, he quickly formed ice ball and struck the robots, freezing them solid. Running toward the nearest one, he conjured a large sledgehammer from thin air. With an overhead slam, the first 3-pointer shattered, the metal breaking apart easily. The hammer vanished as his foot crashed against the ground. From his foot, ice spread, engulfing 3 of the remaining 6 robots, impaling them with jagged spikes. His pursuit of the last 3 continued, his hands transforming into ice daggers as he sliced through them with minimal resistance. Their bodies fell against the concrete, shattering into pieces. The test was just beginning. Quite the batch of students. In a room filled with monitors, the staff observed, joined by heroes like All Might, Frost, and Endeavor. Principal Nizu broke the silence, glancing at Shota Aizawa, who nodded in agreement. They need refinement. Powerful quirks are one thing, knowing how to use that power is another. I suppose that's what we are here for. Yes, you're correct, Aizawa. The best students use a combination of skill, speed, power, and focus to score the most points in the end, Nizu said, sipping his tea. His beady black eyes scanned the wall of monitors before landing on the one he was looking for, Subzero Isuku Yagi. The file from the Hero Association showcased his impressive abilities, including freezing and shattering metal, extensive weapon use, and a decisive approach in combat. It was clear why the Hero Association valued him, as his points continued to climb, not just in attacks but also in rescues. Nizu gestured for Frost to come closer. He knew Isuku Yagi had been missing for years, so he refrained from asking Inko about the circumstances. Instead, he focused on a different line of questioning. Principal Nizu. Frost inquired. This student, Nizu said, pressing a button to zoom in on Izuku. His quirk, cryomancy. Being an ice-quirked individual, what do you think? Can you replicate what he is doing? Frost leaned in, her eyes widening in surprise. Principal Nizu, I don't think this is possible." Inko paused, feeling a sense of recognition. She had never seen it but had certainly heard of it. Clearing his throat, Nizu brought Inko back to the present. "So to be clear, this cannot be imitated. Not by you or your daughter." Inko confirmed with a shake of her head. "What about your son? Has his quirk manifested?" His question silenced the room, as it was a sensitive topic. "All the heroes at you." I knew that Toshinori and Inko's only son had disappeared years ago. Inko remained silent. Nizu waved his paw dismissively and returned his attention to the monitor. Never mind. He doubted she would recognize her son or know the answer. Quirks were unpredictable. "Aizawa. Your thoughts?" Breaking the tension, Aizawa spoke. "Removal of excess movement. Powerful and fast strikes. He aims for the weaknesses of his targets almost exclusively. He doesn't hesitate, and his stamina is exceptional. He's trained well. He uses his quirk to its fullest, replacing himself with a clone in times of danger, separating groups with walls, and using weapons when necessary. He has a solid grasp on fighting. It was the first time any of the A staff had heard Aizawa praise a single student, highlighting the difference between those with DSPLN and those without. We've seen their potential. Now it's time for the real test." Nizu pressed a large red button, and the ground shook violently. Izuku, gripping the head of a three-pointer robot, separated it from its body, extracting what resembled a robotic spine. The robots were not satisfying enemies to fight, he hadn't expected much. UA was a hero school, and harming potential students was out of the question. Tossing the robot's head aside, he stepped off its frozen remains, his hand covered in oil that quickly froze and broke off. His point count must be high, he had stopped tallying how many robots he destroyed. Finally back on the street, he paused as the area around him rumbled. Looking down the long street, he saw students fleeing, heavy footsteps following behind. A large towering robot came into view, and he spotted the design painted on its head, a zero-pointer. Realizing the futility of fighting, he prepared to retreat. Before he could move, a voice reached his ears. Please someone help me. I overused my quirk. I'm stuck." The brunette he had noticed before the exam lay under a pile of rubble, her cries for help going unheard as several students ran past her outstretched hand. His jaw tightened at the sight. Pushing past the fleeing students, he rushed toward the girl. Extending his arms, he froze the legs of the zero-pointer, delaying its approach as cracks began to form. Reaching the girl's side, he placed a hand on the concrete, freezing it solid. He raised his fist and crashed through the rubble, clearing a path. He lifted the girl by the collar of her sports jacket, helping her to her feet. Just then, the ice around the zero-pointer's legs broke, and realizing the danger was imminent, he tossed the girl behind him. With a hand behind his back, he froze the ground just enough for her to slide toward the other students. As he did, the zero-pointer's fist barreled in his direction. Jumping back, an ice clone took his place, perfectly replicating his stance. The zero-pointer's fist crashed into the clone, freezing its movements. Now that it had struck, Izuku had no choice but to retaliate with all his strength. Jumping onto the frozen left arm, he spread the ice further. Forming an ice spear, he stabbed downward into the robot's joint, breaking the arm and freezing the rest of the robot to its shoulder. The robot attempted to retaliate, but Izuku jumped onto its face, securing a hold with two daggers. Its strike caused it to injure itself. Scaling its face, Izuku stood atop the zero-pointer. Placing his hand below him, a ball of ice swirled violently. He crashed his hand down, and the result was immediate. Jagged spikes filled the gaps between the robot's head and chest, while the front faceplate exploded outward. Feeling the robot sway beneath him, Izuku crossed his arms over his chest. His body coated in ice, he fell backward. The crowd watching his battle gasped, some screaming as the end of the ice path he used to save the girl exploded in a mist, with Isuku reappearing. Undisturbed by their surprise, he watched the zero-pointer topple over into the nearest building, sending up a plume of dust. Okay, listeners, the practical exam is done. Please wait for our nurse to check your condition before you go, and you. We'll send your results within a week, Present Mike announced quickly after the zero-pointer fell. As the exam concluded, Izuku made his way toward the exit, only to be stopped at the city's entrance by Aizawa. Could you please come with me? Aizawa asked. Izuku nodded, following the hero. His day was not over just yet. The sounds of students faded as the distance grew. Curious stares were directed at Izuku and Aizawa, but neither showed any intention of acknowledging them. Walking side by side, the height difference became apparent. While Izuku wasn't towering over Aizawa, he was certainly larger in both height and build. Aizawa's eyes glanced at Izuku from behind his hair. Now that they were close, he could clearly see the boy's features. Even Aizawa had to admit that Izuku was exceptional. The aura he exuded, his stature, and the details not obscured by his mask were striking. Most notably, Aizawa noticed the large scar that ran over Izuku's right eye, a discolored mark that indicated it was not a recent injury. As Aizawa continued to observe, he noted Izuku's dark black hair, which almost concealed the dark green beneath. Their gazes met, and when they stepped into the sunlight, Izuku's cold teal eyes seemed to glow. Aizawa held his stare, activating his quirk as they both scrutinized each other until Aizawa's lips curled into a small grin. He found himself liking the kid more and more. Upon reaching the curb where the buses were parked, Aizawa led Izuku to a car. "Please, get in," he said, gesturing to the passenger door. Izuku opened it and sat inside. Aizawa entered the driver's side and turned on the car, needing to get to you, eh? Their walk continued in silence, the echoes of their steps breaking the stillness of UA's main campus building. The school was as grand as the rumors suggested. Despite being operational for decades, the main campus was state-of-the-art and well-kept. The tiled floor shone under the fluorescent lights, and the walls had been recently painted, a lingering smell of fresh paint in the air. UA had certainly earned its prestige as a place for nurturing top pro heroes. It was the perfect place for Izuku's clan to regain recognition. After 5 minutes, they reached a large wooden door. Aizawa knocked twice. "Come in," a voice called. Aizawa opened the door and led Izuku into the principal's office. Nizu, the animal principal, watched closely as they entered. "Aizawa, please close the door on your way out," Nizu requested. Aizawa complied without complaint, though his eyes narrowed at the situation unfolding. There was no one else in the room, not even other heroes. Izuku scanned the area, taking in the walls, ceiling, and floor before resting his gaze on Nizu. The principal bowed his head slightly. "Grandmaster, I am UA's principal, Nizu. Please come and sit. Would you like some tea?" Nizu gestured to a seat in front of his desk, and Izuku approached. Before responding, he placed a closed right fist into an open left palm and bowed his head, showing respect. "Thank you, Principal Nizu." He took a seat as Nizu hopped off the desk and into his own chair. The two remained silent as Nizu poured 2 cups of tea. As he grabbed his cup, the mask around Izuku's face dissipated, allowing him to take a small sip. Nizu had excellent taste in tea, but both knew that sharing a cup was not the purpose of this meeting. Clearing his throat, Nizu spoke cautiously, "Before we begin, I must express my congratulations on your acceptance into UA. Your scores during the written portion were in the upper percentile, and I can confidently tell you that you've surpassed your fellow students, becoming the representative of the first-year students." Izuku nodded. "Is it permitted to tell me the results before the others?" "Well, as the principal of UA, I believe there will be no complaints," Nizu replied with a small smile. "I believe it is best if you make your intentions known, Principal Nizu. Why did you call me here?" Nizu set his cup down, looking Izuku in the eyes. I know you are Isuku Yagi. The name left Nizu's mouth, and Isuku felt a shiver run down his spine. I assume you have a reason to say my name. Nodding, Nizu continued, I meant no offense, Grandmaster. The circumstances surrounding your disappearance as a child are unknown, and while I have my own theories, I don't intend to have you reveal information yourself. I do this out of concern for you, and its students. Your identity will become known throughout you, You may use a mask to cover your face, as there are no regulations against such articles of clothing. However, Toshinori Yagi, Inko Yagi, are both newly instated teachers, and Izumi Yagi will be attending this school. I suspect it will only be a matter of time before they recognize you. Familial relations aside, I cannot in good faith place a student capable of extreme harm next to those who are most susceptible. I wanted to meet you to establish an understanding between us. The room fell into a quick silence, the atmosphere growing tense. Izuku closed his eyes for a moment before responding. Your caution is admirable. I appreciate what you've done, Principal Nizu. Had any heroes been in this room and tried to stop me, this wouldn't have ended well for either side. I understand your apprehension, even I recognize that my identity cannot remain hidden. I have no intention of causing harm to students unrelated to my personal grudges. However, I will give you a warning, what I receive, I give back tenfold. I will also tell you that my relationship with the Yagi household is no more. The Lin Kuei's inheritor, Inko Yagi, and her successor, Izumi Yagi, failed to uphold the responsibilities of the clan. If they choose to disregard my succession, it will be met with hostility. Well, I suppose self-defense could apply in those situations, Nizu said, trying to find common ground. I think we can conclude this meeting. I need your current address and the name you'll be enrolling with. Your uniform will be sent a week after the official scores are announced, and the semester will start in 3 weeks. He passed a small piece of paper and a pen to Izuku, who wrote down his information. Thank you, Izuku Midoriya. I appreciate your cooperation. After bowing to each other, Nizu watched Izuku leave. Once the door clicked shut, he leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the upcoming year. It was going to be tougher than any before. Unlike before, U.A.S. halls buzzed with excitement. Students rushed to their new classes, and Izuku walked quietly in his uniform, surprised by the quality of the clothes. Truly invested in their students. As he adjusted his red tie, he inspected his appearance. He had followed the dress code closely, with the only exception being the dragon medallion on the right side of his blazer, which he wore with pride. He had even decided against wearing a mask, realizing it was pointless to hide. Standing before a large door marked Class 1A, he could hear the loud chatter from inside. Grasping the handle, he slid the door open, revealing Tenya Ida energetically addressing a pair of ash-blonde siblings. The noise died down as the other students turned to look at him. 5 pairs of narrowed eyes focused on his appearance, trying to place him. Izumi Yagi's gaze lingered on the scar over his eye. Before anyone could speak, Ida approached him. I'm glad to see you in this class, he said, bowing slightly, a small smile on his face. Likewise, Izuku replied. Ida was the most rational and respectful person Izuku had met, though his experiences were limited. Their conversation seemed to end after the greeting, but before an awkward silence could settle, a voice piped up from behind him. Turning, Izuku saw the brunette he had saved during the entrance exam. She bowed and introduced herself. I'm Ochako Uraraka. Thank you for saving me. The way you handled that 0-pointer was so cool. Her nervousness faded as she smiled at him, her fists shaking with excitement. I'm Izuku Midoriya. I'm glad I was able to save you in time, he replied, grinning. He didn't feel the need to boast about the 0-pointer, it was just an obstacle. Uraraka's enthusiasm drew the attention of the other students, who began to whisper among themselves. Suddenly, a desk clattered to the ground as Izumi, Shoto Todoroki, and Katsuki Bakugu stood up, finally recognizing their brother, their friend, their punching bag. Izuku, Izumi said through gritted teeth, her body tensing as the classroom door slammed shut. Glad to see you're all making friends. Now sit down, Aizawa said as he walked in, his tired eyes glaring at the rowdy students. Everyone, including Izuku, took their seats. Aizawa cleared his throat and addressed the class. Welcome to you, Hero Course Class 1A. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down, and that's not going to work. Time is precious, and only the most rational students understand this. I am Shota Aizawa, and I will be your homeroom teacher this year. He grabbed a gym uniform from the podium and tossed it to the nearest student, who happened to be Uraraka. Each of you will take a uniform, change, and meet outside. Do it in 5 minutes, or you're expelled. At his threat, the students rushed out, Aizawa tossing uniforms as they went. Izuku approached him. Here, Aizawa said, handing him a neatly folded pair. They exchanged nods. The locker room, like the rest of UA, was well maintained. As the boys changed, conversations varied, with some focusing on Izuku. When he took off his shirt, the scars on his back were visible remnants of his past experiences. Most students were hesitant to ask about them, except for one. Dude. What's your workout routine? A spiky-haired boy exclaimed. Izuku turned to see the red-haired boy grinning at him. I'm Kirishima. Nice to meet ya. He extended his hand, and Izuku shook it firmly. Midoriya, Izuku replied, smiling back. As he finished dressing, he noticed Shoto Todoroki and Katsuki Bakugo glaring at him. Instead of shrinking away, he found their expressions amusing and chuckled as he left the changing room, which only frustrated them further. Once all the students gathered on the field, Aizawa, who had been waiting, spoke. I know this is the first day, but I'm here to make you heroes, so we will be doing a quirk assessment test. Forget about the orientation. The teachers at U have different methods than other schools. We prioritize your improvement over ceremonies. Each second of preparation is crucial in the field. You have all taken standardized tests for years, but those only measure physical prowess, not your ability to use your quirks. This time is different. Remember, we are not all created equal, those who are powerful will excel. He scanned the crowd, his gaze landing on Izuku before shifting to Izumi. Izumi Yagi, you placed second in the entrance exam. Come up to the circle. Izumi stepped forward and stretched her arms. What was the farthest you threw a softball in your latest physical exam? Aizawa asked. About 74 meters, she replied. Alright then, try it with your quirk. The rules are simple, stay in the circle, and anything else goes. Izumi nodded and grabbed the ball, feeling it begin to freeze in her hand as ice coated its surface. Her body tensed, and gold-colored lightning danced across her skin as she wound her arm back in a pitcher's stance. When she threw the ball, the students were taken aback by the shockwave that radiated outward from her throw. But she wasn't done yet, she outstretched her hands, her forehead creased in concentration as she used her cryokinesis to propel the ball even further. Aizawa glanced at the phone in his hand, watching the numbers climb rapidly. Izumi was impressive, much like her parents. However, he noted the lack of refinement in her quirk usage. Finally, the number stopped, and he turned the phone to face the students, revealing a distance of 2 meters. This is how we will gauge your current capabilities, and from there, we can begin to improve. 2 meters. That's incredible, one student exclaimed. That looks like fun. I want to try, another chimed in. Do we get to use our quirks? Yes, someone else shouted. This test will be easy, several students excitedly agreed. Aizawa's expression remained serious, matching Izuku's level of focus. Easy, you say. How about this, the last place gets expelled. The classroom erupted in protests, with Uraraka leading the charge. Expelled. But it's the first day. That's not fair, she argued. Fair. The world doesn't care about fairness. Natural disasters, villain attacks, and loss are all part of life. As heroes in training, it's your responsibility to confront these challenges. If you don't think you're cut out for this, let me know, and I will expel you right now. Aizawa's glare intensified, his hair floating as his eyes glowed red, silencing the students. Now that we've seen what second place can do, how will the rest of you measure up? Izuku Midoriya, please come up. As Izuku stepped forward, he caught the ball tossed his way, glancing at Izumi, who was still glaring at him. Could he replicate her feat? He felt confident in his physical strength, especially with the boost from One for All. This test was about strategy. Should he reveal all his abilities or just one? He decided to keep it simple, knowing the field was wide enough that Izumi's score only covered a fraction of it. Before he began, a mocking voice interrupted from the side. Hey! Teach, just give this quirkless loser last place already. Katsuki Bakugo's insult echoed through the class, causing some to question Izuku's abilities. But everything changed when Izuku stomped his foot on the ground. In an instant, the entire 20-kilometer dirt field froze, frost forming on the windows of nearby buildings. The other students shivered, with one girl diving into her training uniform for warmth, while the Todoroki siblings used their fire to combat the cold. With a casual underhanded toss, the ball rolled across the frozen ground at a speed that surpassed Izumi's throw. Aizawa watched the numbers on his phone climb beyond Izumi's score before stopping at the maximum range of the field. Moments later, the ice vanished, leaving no trace behind. Aizawa was astonished. Even with his quirk activated, it seemed to have no effect on Izuku's control over the ice. This level of mastery was beyond what he had seen before, even during the entrance exam. He recalled Nizu's question to Lin Kuei about whether she could replicate what Izuku was doing, to which she had answered no. This was a level of control that even pro heroes would envy. As expected from the first-year representative, Aizawa said, gesturing to Izuku. This is what you should strive for during your time here. Now, Deku. What was that? Katsuki shouted, rushing toward Izuku, his eyes wide with disbelief. The explosions in his hands intensified as he approached, but Izuku slid forward, catching him off guard. Unable to react, Katsuki was hit in the abdomen, gasping in pain. Izuku then grabbed his hair and delivered a knee strike, leaving Katsuki stunned. Feeling the impact, Izuku maintained his grip on Katsuki's hair while delivering a series of quick punches to his ribs. After the sixth punch, he lifted Katsuki off the ground, his left hand growing colder as he gripped Katsuki's throat. Midoriya. Stand down. Aizawa intervened, using his capture weapon to bind Izuku's wrist. The teacher was aware that he couldn't win this fight, the material of his scarf was already freezing. Please, stand down. Glaring at Aizawa, Izuku released Katsuki, who fell to the ground, unable to retaliate. Izuku stepped past both Katsuki and Aizawa, returning to the sidelines while ignoring the shocked expressions of his classmates and Izumi's gaze. It was clear that his display had overshadowed her abilities. After confirming that Katsuki was okay, Aizawa cleared his throat. Now, as I was saying, let's begin the other tests. The tests progressed quickly, with Katsuki struggling to perform due to his injuries. The students stared at the screen projected behind Aizawa, which displayed their scores. Using these scores, you should have a good idea of where you stand. This list is from best to worst, and remember, the last place will be expelled. As the students gathered around to see the scores, it was no surprise that Izuku topped the list, followed closely by Izumi. None of the other students managed to surpass the two, even Shoji falling short of Izuku's performance. Had he known that the boy he was competing against had a reputation for being ruthless, he would have understood the stakes better. As the names were read, one elicited a loud cry. A small boy with striking purple hair exclaimed, "NOO! Last place! But I haven't even gotten my HRM yet." The girls looked at him in disgust, some feeling relieved that it was him facing the consequences when Aizawa crushed their hopes. Take these scores in mind as you progress through the year. Make rivalries or don't, try to surpass your fellow heroes. Also, that thing about expelling last place was a lie. Now, class dismissed. After changing back into their uniforms, the day continued as usual with introductions to subjects and teachers, culminating in one last class. While waiting for Aizawa, Ida suggested that the class introduce themselves. Seeing no issues with it, the class agreed and took turns presenting themselves. Izuku listened carefully to each name and their associated quirks. He found it curious how openly they shared their powers. Finally, it was his turn. As he approached the podium, he looked out at his classmates. Some shrank back at his gaze, others leaned in with interest and admiration, while a few looked on with hostility. Izuku Midoriya, Cryomancy. His introduction was brief. Unlike others who shared details about their hobbies or favorite foods, he kept his personal life private. To his classmates, Izuku remained as enigmatic as when they first met him. His reluctance to share should have deterred many, but instead, it only piqued their curiosity. How powerful was his quirk? Did he have any weaknesses? What did he enjoy eating? Was he single? The class ended soon after that. The first day at U was over, but the challenges were just beginning. Izumi's first instinct was to run to her parents. The tranquility of U would not last.